You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network. This is the ThunderQuack Podcast, the official podcast of ThunderQuack Podcast Network, where anything can happen. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your butts. It's ThunderQuack time!
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to another ThunderQuack Spoilercast. This time it's going to be for none other than Solo, A Star Wars Story, which just came out last week, and anxious to talk about it. So, should be a fun one. My name is Tim from Star Wars The Saga Continues, and joining me on this episode, as we turn to the ThunderQuack Spoilercast, is Chris Clow. Chris, thank you for joining me on this episode.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, just to be talking about Solo, because there's a lot more to discuss to this movie than I guess initially going into it, which is a great thing for me, and I'm sure for you for being diehard Star Wars fans here. So I guess before we get into all the stuff that was packed into Solo, A Star Wars Story, I guess I want to go to, like we always do, start off with our initial first reactions after seeing it. And I guess this is our excitement level going into the movie. So, and I guess before we begin, as always, even though it is titled on there, the spoiler cast, we'll be going into full spoilers throughout the episode. So the warning is out there. So Chris, I got to go ahead and start with you. I guess, what was your excitement level going into it, and then your immediate reaction after the movie was over?
Excitement level, I'm kind of ashamed to say it now, but it was pretty low. And it's not because I don't have an abundance of affection for the Star Wars universe or the characters, obviously. Well, at least obvious to me. I mean, maybe there's someone listening that's never heard my voice before, but I love Star Wars. So it was never a question that I was going to see this movie as quickly as possible. I wasn't able to get in on the very first showing, but I certainly got in on the opening weekend. And so I guess my excitement was generally low just because I kind of fell into that mentality that I think a fair amount of people had, that this was a movie that not too many fans seemed to ask for. But at the same time, too, I mean, it's Han Solo, it's Lando Calrissian, it's Chewbacca, and it's Star Wars. So how could that, as a formula, is pretty irresistible. So I went in with relatively low expectations. I mean, I, like pretty much everybody in the fan community, has heard about the difficulties behind the scenes with this movie and getting things patched together in time for release. So especially coming off of a couple of different movies that have had that happen over the last couple of years, namely with Rogue One and with Justice League, I wasn't quite sure how Solo would work out, even though I liked both of those movies quite a lot. But immediate first reaction is that I was just very charmed by this movie. I had a great time. I legitimately had a really wonderful time seeing a story that had a little bit more nuance to it than I think I thought that it would. And I was pleasantly surprised by some of the performances, which we'll get into in detail in a little bit. But yeah, generally it was a very pleasant surprise. And I'm actually pretty keen to see it again pretty quick here.
Yeah, cool. So for me, I was really excited going into it. And just from the get-go, when the movie was announced, I mean, we've heard all those things. Do we really need to see Han Solo's origin story? And the excitement level wasn't quite there from the get-go. But for all the points you just said, Chris, about the stuff that we could potentially see in this movie, and before it was even confirmed, but we kind of knew it was heading the direction, seeing Han and Chewie meet for the first time. And that was the big thing I was excited for, and couldn't wait to see the beginning of that iconic relationship begin in this movie. But then you throw in the other stuff, like Han meeting Lando and Han winning the Falcon from Lando and seeing the Kessel runs, like iconic moments that we've only heard about throughout the course of the movies and like several books and comics and all that type of stuff. But to actually see it play out on screen was something I just couldn't wait to see. So just that alone is what had me excited going into the movie. And yeah, even though there was all the trouble reports about the behind the scenes stuff with Phil Lord and Chris Miller being let go from the project and Ron Howard stepping in. I was never really like overly concerned. Oh no, the movies, I'm concerned about it now. Don't know if this is going to play out the way they were intending. I mean, of course, maybe there was the potential for it, but I just had confidence that with Ron Howard coming on board and Lucasfilm knew that they had something good here, and they just needed a director to come in and clean it up, make a relaxed atmosphere of the shooting process, even though they had to reshoot a lot. So I was still confident that even though there was some trouble in productions early on, they would be able to get straightened out. And so I never did have that worry going into the movie about the troubled production process I had. So when I saw the movie and after it was over, I just couldn't help but have a great feeling afterwards for several reasons. And first off, being that everything I was hoping to see in the movie that I just mentioned, I felt for the most part it delivered on all those fronts. Everything I was excited for, I was happy with how it played out on screen. But then you throw in all the surprises that we got in the movie, which we'll get into later, of course, and just the potential of some very cool story possibilities that is set up on a lot of different levels with the different scenarios that they can do. So I just left the theater just very excited and very happy with what I got and just the potential of what we can get moving forward from the movie. So yeah, I had a great buzz after the film was over. Just couldn't wait to see it again. And I've seen it 2 times now, and just the more I think about it, and I'm sure as we're going to talk about here, this is going to make me want to see it again. I had that really positive impression on once it was over. So yeah, I guess we can dive into some specifics here now. So I guess the first thing to touch on would be, the new / familiar characters, or I should say familiar characters with new performances, I guess is a better term for it, that we got. Of course, we have a new actor playing Han Solo with Alden Ehrenreich, and same thing for Lando with Donald Glover. And we got Chewie back, and it's being performed by the same actor who's played him in The Last Jedi and for most of The Force Awakens too, even though it was Peter Mayhew played Chewie in some of the shots in that movie as well. It's the actor Joonas, and I always mess up his last name, so I'll just refer to him as Joonas right now. But yeah, so those are the familiar characters we got. So how do you think, we'll start off with the title character Han Solo. What do you think of Alden Ehrenreich's performance as Han?
It was he put his own stamp on it, and that was kind of something that I wasn't really sure that he would be able to do, just because the personality of Harrison Ford looms large over Han Solo, and he always has. We've never really had to adjust to other performers in these iconic Star Wars roles before, since they've always persisted in the solid continuity and expanded universe materials. And the covers that we see, obviously they're rendered with the same faces as the characters who initially established those roles in the first place. So the idea of someone else playing Han Solo, admittedly for me, was a little tough to swallow. I wasn't against it. In fact, I figured that when Disney bought Lucasfilm in the first place, something like this was probably an inevitability. But as far as the actual performance that he turned in, I was very happy with it. A friend of mine made a pretty solid comparison, and I think it's very apt, to the same way that Chris Pine embodies Captain Kirk. And because really that's one of the closest scenarios that we can see. Obviously, Tim, you and I are comic book fans. We're used to other performers embodying characters that we've loved our entire lives. So, some of that certainly plays into the ability for me personally to adjust to something like this. But, you take it a little bit of a step further, just because Ehrenreich is the first performer outside of Harrison Ford in a movie to play Han Solo. So, part of you wants to measure those expectations a little bit. But at the same time, it's a Star Wars movie, and you need to feel like you have a legitimate connection to these guys that were so well established in the 70s and the 80s. So Ehrenreich, I think, did a pretty solid job with the material that he was given, and I think that he's very easily comparable to Pine as Kirk in a positive way. That's a specific scenario, and I know that this isn't a Star Trek podcast.
It's all
good. Those characters. Yeah, it's I feel like it's the most apt comparison, even more than, because now we've had 3 movies with new actors embodying those classic Star Trek characters. And for most of the Star Trek fan base who were initially resistant to the idea of new actors coming into those parts, a lot of us don't feel like there needs to be any more buy-in. Like, a fair amount of Star Trek fans, obviously I can't speak for every Star Trek fan, but a fair amount of Star Trek fans now buy Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, Zachary Quinto as Spock, Carl Urban as Dr. McCoy, Zoe Saldana as Uhura. And I'm pretty sure that if we do get subsequent movies with these younger performers embodying these classic Star Wars characters, we're having a little bit of imposter syndrome right now, just like we did with Star Trek 2009. But you give them time and they're just going to come into their own even more with these characters, and we won't need to buy in like we might need to on this first go around. So I think it portends great things to come, and I'm excited at the prospect of seeing Aaron Reich play Han Solo again, and I wasn't sure I was going to be before I saw the movie.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, once this was first announced, I've said it on the Saga Continues podcast episode, however long ago that was, is that, man, like this, whoever is going to land this role has some really big shoes to fill, and it could really, it's pretty much going to make or break the film if we buy into this actor's performance of playing a young Han Solo. I mean, it's a really daunting task for any actor to take on, but I had faith in Lucasfilm at that point. With they did a great casting job with Force Awakens and Rogue One, and just knew that they were going to make sure they got it right for this, because it's such a big role that they have to nail. And I'm just glad to say that I think they did get it right with Alden Ehrenreich. And what's great about it to me is that, because we even talked about it before too, how you just don't want someone doing a Harrison Ford impression, and that's all they're relying on. Like, they really don't have the acting chops to pull off other things they need to do for other scenes, emotional scenes or humorous scenes. So yeah, it was never really something that I just got to make sure we got the perfect Harrison Ford lookalike, or person who can fluctuate his voice, vocal tones, and all that stuff. So that wasn't the main focus, and that's what I think we got with Aaron Wright. We just got a good performance from him, and it's not a Harrison Ford impersonation, or just even really, it's a different portrayal of Han Solo than Harrison Ford got, for the most part, I would say. But at the same time, it's a great performance, and there is I got enough of a Han Solo feeling when I saw Aaron Reich in this movie in certain moments, just by his mannerisms, or even the way he said things. Not all the time, but what was great about it, he had some great range of emotions that he showed in this movie, from some emotional scenes, and then ones where he had to show that cocky side of Han Solo, the arrogant side, and the playfulness of him too. So I thought he embodied all that stuff that we know and love about Han Solo perfectly in his performance here. And yeah, I thought he did a great job. And like you said, it just made me excited for the potential possibilities of getting sequels with him in the role of Han Solo again. And I loved his chemistry he had with Chewie in this movie as well. That was another big thing that I felt they needed to nail, just that chemistry that Han had with Chewie in the original trilogy. I felt it played out really, really well here in Solo. I mean, just as I said, that was something I was really looking forward to seeing. And one of the things I was curious about is, what is the first meeting between Han and Chewie going to be like? And we've had some expanded universe stories, which are now legends, of how they first met, with Han kind of saving Chewie from being, as he was a slave in the Empire, being beaten by Imperials. I think I can't remember the definitive version of that, but I remember reading a comic. I'm not sure how different it was from other accounts of how that went down. So it played out differently in the movie than what I was accustomed to, but at the same time, I liked what they did there, and how it still had the stuff I was hoping for, with Chewie being a slave of the Empire, and that's how him and Han meet, and they he helps him get out and escape from the Empire. But I like how it done in the movie is that they pretty much help each other get out, and I just loved how that played out. I mean, that sequence was really something I wasn't expecting, but I loved it. I mean, having Chewie be a captive, but then the stormtroopers throwing him down in a cage to have him be eaten by a Wookiee. And as soon as they said, feed him to the beast, I kind of had a feeling of who it was going to be, but it still played out really perfectly. It just I mean, just visually seeing Chewie like that, all kind of worn down, full of mud, just his fur all wet. It just didn't look like the Chewie we're accustomed to seeing. But I mean, that's what he needed to look like to show the effect of what he's been through being a slave of the Empire, and just the way that Han interacted, and just that little fight they had, and Han using his knowledge of how to speak Wookiee to get him on his side, I thought was really, really well done. So it was different, but I'd like to change the mate that's how Han and Chewie met, because I felt it built more of a respect for each other, where they helped each other to get out. It wasn't something where just Han helped Chewie or Chewie helped Han, but they worked together, and that just was the start of how they'd work together for years to come, and it all came from that moment. So I loved how that played out. And again, it goes back to Aaron Reich's performance and capturing that chemistry even early on in their history with Chewie. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, it established them as partners and as equals, as opposed to, one maybe having more prominence over the other. But, going back to what you said about with the monster line, you knew it was coming. Yeah, I did too. It was telegraphed, but, that didn't take away from it at all for me. I mean, I remember Christmas Eve 1998 when I was in the 5th grade. My brother and I overheard my grandma talking to my parents because she thought that we were out of earshot, asking if, do you want to let the boys open their Nintendo tonight? And so we knew the next morning that we were getting a Nintendo 64. It did nothing to mitigate the enjoyment of actually ripping the paper off of it.
So you didn't have to fake your excitement when you actually opened it. It was natural still. Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, Chewie was what I was looking forward to the most in this movie. Like, before everything, I have such an affection for Chewbacca. He is very much one of my absolute all-time favorite characters in the Star Wars universe. And that's what I wanted to, even before I actually was able to get excited about seeing a young Han Solo, I was always excited at the prospect of seeing a buddy movie that has Chewbacca in it. So that was probably the thing that that really had me going the most, was how Chewie was going to be treated, how they were going to end up bringing him in, how they were going to portray the beginning of that partnership and friendship and really brotherhood that those two characters have. And I was not disappointed. I mean, as much as I might have some issues with some of the wink, wink, nudge, nudge stuff later in the movie, which certainly doesn't override my enjoyment of the, like, I like fan service because I'm a fan. So even if I have to admit that, it's fan service, I still get a kick out of it. But there was no trepidation when it came to fully enjoying Chewbacca's portrayal in this movie. I loved it. I loved seeing the surprising sort of affection that he had and that he illustrated in ways that you might not expect. And I just loved seeing him in action again and in a different spot and getting a little bit more of the spotlight than he maybe got in any of his other appearances. So it was great. I loved Chewie in this movie.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
He was definitely a standout for me too. And like you, one of the ones I was really excited to see in this movie. And like you mentioned the action real quick, he had some great moments in this. We talked about those little skirmish with Han in the beginning, but also the whole sequence on Kessel when, he sees the Wookiees being enslaved there and he goes to help them. And we've got a little glimpse of that in the trailer, but it was still cool seeing that whole sequence play out and see Wookiees, without any weapons, just using their brute strength to take out their enemies. It was really cool to see. Yeah,
it was really the first time since Revenge of the Sith that we got to see Wookiees in fuller force like that. I wish that was actually more of the movie. I would have been okay if that was like a B plot in the movie. But I'm not going to complain about what we didn't get, because what we did get was pretty cool.
Yeah, because to be honest, if I had any nitpicks or complaints, a lot of it is what I didn't get, but stuff I got more of, which really isn't a fault of the movie, just my own expectations and stuff. Because one of those things was, that they set up with Chewie, looking for his family, and Han couldn't say or couldn't translate if it was his family or tribe, and like how we said, what's the difference? But establishing that there is like a family aspect that Chewie is looking for. And because we got that one shot in the trailer where Chewie puts his head on another Wookiee, kind of like saying goodbye. I thought that was going to be, his wife that we saw in that moment in the movie, but they didn't really say, because I thought maybe if we, since I saw that in the trailer and we got that hint early on of Chewie say he's looking for his family, that maybe they would somehow would take him to Kashyyyk, like a quick stop there, but Chewie would realize he has to stick with Han, and then he goes off with him. But I wasn't expecting to have that moment where be on Kessel, where he's just saving just some Wookiees that he's seen being enslaved and tortured. And I was wondering, is that going to be the family he was looking for? Like, is he going to make a point to say, oh, this is it, I found them? But they didn't really establish that. It was just that, I guess you can take it that way if you wanted to. But for me, I guess I just took it, he just saw Wookiees in need and he needed to help them. And he still said goodbye to it, I guess, in a way that was, kind of tough for him to do, to leave his, his clan there, or his Wookiee species that, even though maybe he knows or doesn't know, but if he didn't, it still had to be tough for him to see fellow Wookiees who were enslaved say goodbye to him to stick with Han. So it still came across where, it was a tough decision for Chewie to leave a family of Wookiees to go to help Han and Lando there.
Yeah, and there wasn't there an implication in dialogue that the Empire had basically ransacked Kashyyyk?
Yeah.
So, I mean, even if he sees a couple of other Wookiees, I personally don't think that it was his family. That would be extremely coincidental.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that he would feel a sense of camaraderie if he just sees other Wookiees, not knowing, potentially how many of his people survived the Empire laying waste to his world or occupying his world or whatever happened. Because I guess that probably hasn't been established in EU, has it? In any of the things that have come out thus far that's still in continuity?
They just touch on it really in, like, after post Return of the Jedi in the book Life Debt, that establishes that the Wookiee, Kashyyyk was still enslaved during that time, and a big portion of that book was Han and Chewie going to liberate them. So
okay, yeah. All right. So conceivably then at this point in history, they don't know where the other Wookiees are or how many of them are out there. So I would think that, if he just sees Wookiees, he's going to want to help as a first priority, and that's exactly what he did. And I thought it was great.
Also, I think about it, they did in the first episode of Star Wars Rebels, they actually go to Kessel and they still had Wookiees enslaved during that time period, which is a few years after Solo. So then they helped liberate those Wookiees there. So unfortunately, now when you think about it, the little insurrection that they had on the spice mines at Kessel there didn't last too long, because when you look at Rebels, there were still Wookiees enslaved there, and I'm sure other species enslaved. But
every little bit helps.
Yeah, there you go. You got to look at the positives.
Yeah.
So that's Han and Chewie, but of course the other big character who made an appearance in Solo is Lando Calrissian, being played by Donald Glover, and you just knew from the get-go that Donald Glover was going to kill it as Lando before we even saw anything of his performance, just when we heard that he was announced to play Lando. So not going to really shock anyone here saying that he was perfect in the movie when I actually got to see his performance. I mean, he just nailed it. I mean, just his first bit of dialogue that he says, I mean, he just sounded almost exactly like Billy D. Williams there. It was just pitch perfect.
Oh, yeah.
And every scene he was in was great. He had great, funny dialogue. His interactions with all the characters, especially Han, was great. And the first moment we got was him and Han, where they play Sabacc against each other for the first time. They were all, I would say, building up in the promotion for it. Like, that was the Sabacc card game where Han won the Falcon from Lando, but it turned out to be like a precursor to the eventual fateful game that they played. But I will say, this scene that we got with the two of them playing Sabacc for the first time, it was great. I mean, I would say it's better than the actual game where Han won the Falcon, even though I like how that played out. It's just the way they're interacting with each other, kind of messing with each other, giving these little like insults. Lando calling Han Han and all that type of stuff was just really, really good. So Donald Glover nailed it as Lando.
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the biggest signs of a really great actor is their ability to modulate their voice. I mean, whether you want to look at someone like Tom Hardy or Heath Ledger as the Joker or Philip Seymour Hoffman as Truman Capote, if you have the ability to create a performance with your voice, Daniel Day-Lewis as Abraham Lincoln, or really anything that guy's in.
True.
I mean, if you have the ability to actually not just do an impression, but actually create a tonally consistent performance with your voice while also doing actual, on-camera acting, that's the sign of a great performer. And I was shocked at how closely Donald Glover was able to mimic not only the sound of Billy D. Williams' voice, but also the cadence that he was able to speak with, while also being Lando, in full costume in front of the camera. So yeah, I mean, this was one of the better performances that I've seen in any Star Wars movie, and you wouldn't get that impression if you didn't have Billy D. Williams as a baseline for with which to compare. But he does a great job of evoking everything that he needs to, but he also gives it a little bit of a playful spin that is unique to Donald Glover. So pretty much everything about the performance as Lando. I mean, there were some surprising things in the movie as far as the specifics of how Lando's and Han's relationship began. But beyond that, you can't ignore that this was just a really solid performance all around. I really got a kick out of seeing him play Lando.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about kind of at the beginning, where even though, like I said earlier, the first bit of dialogue he had, he sounds just like Billy D. Williams, but it wasn't that impression feeling we were talking about, how that's not what we want to see in these performance of characters being played by new actors. I mean, he just felt natural that he was like that. And I would say too, like even over the course of the movie, not every bit of dialogue he had, he sounded exactly like Billy D. Williams. He had his own unique quality to it as well, like you were saying. And yeah, again, just the range that he had with it too, the playfulness that he had, the charisma that, Lando's known for, played out perfectly. And then just at the end, the frustration he had at seeing the Falcon just torn up and just in almost several parts of it in pieces, and just his annoyance and this at Han during that moment where he says, "I hate you." It just was just perfect. It's capturing that, relationship at the time where, yeah, he hates him now, but it just makes you appreciate their encounter more in Empire when they first see each other again on Bespin. So every interaction that Han and Lando had, it just made that their interactions together in Empire Strikes Back, and even Return of the Jedi, but I think more so in Empire, this that much more meaningful and better, because I actually watched Empire a couple of nights ago after I saw Solo the second time. And when we got to that point in the movie, I mean, a lot of their dialogue when they first arrive on Bespin, I just went right back to the stuff I saw in Solo. Between Han and Lando there, and it just, like I said, it enriches it. It just makes it great that we can just call back to those moments now and know what they're talking about when he says, hey, your ship, hey, you lost it to me fair and square, and just Han saying, hey, Lando, like we go a ways back, Lando and me, and we know what he's referring to now. So that's what I love about getting these prequel type stories with characters we know about already in other movies, and when we get to fill in the blank spaces on those pages there with stuff like that, I just think it enriches it. And yeah, it did it with Han and Chewie, and it does it with Han and Lando this movie. So I just felt they just did a great job what they did with these characters that we were already familiar with in the new setting, and just getting to see where the relationship started from. I just thought they played it out. The actors, the writing, directing, I just felt it did a great service to these characters that we already know and love.
Absolutely.
All right, so we went over the familiar faces that we got to see in Solo, but now it's time to talk about some of the new characters that were introduced, and there are quite a few of them. And I got to say, just right off the bat, I pretty much loved all the new characters we got in here. There's some that I like more than others, and of course some that had more screen time and more central to the plot. But overall, I didn't have one complaint or felt that there was one character that he or she was unneeded or they weren't performed well. Like, I didn't get any of that. Anytime one of these new characters were on screen, I thought the performances were great. So out of all the new characters we got, Chris, I guess which one was your favorite, or maybe you have a couple that stood out to you?
I think L3 probably. Well, but L3 is kind of not a new character in a way. If you want to get into the specifics, and it's weird. I don't know what telegraphed that, but there was something that just made me think, oh, she's going to end up being the nav computer. I mean, they gave the hint that her database when it came to navigation is unmatched in the galaxy. And I think that was the point in the movie where I was thinking, why wouldn't they put that in? Is she going to be the Falcon's nav computer? Is she the one who's mouthing off to C-3PO in The Empire Strikes Back? oh my God, I think she is. And it was a really nice touch, but also too, it fills in a little bit of a hole because you're like, why is 3PO talking about the dialect of the nav computer? And now you
Yep.
know.
Hmm.
And it's so cool. So that was a pleasant surprise for me, but also it was just really fun seeing what her banter was like, particularly with Kira when they were both in
Yeah.
the cockpit. But no, it was great. I had a lot of fun with a character that I didn't think that I would create any connection with while I was watching the movie, but that ended up not being the case. And it ended up being a lot of fun. And it answered a question that I didn't even know I had from The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I thought, you see, maybe, I don't know, I was, I guess, oblivious to that, or just, not thinking about it at the time, because it did come as a surprise to me when uh, they made that suggestion, or Han made that suggestion about using L3's navigational system. I was like, oh, okay. So even when they said that before, they hinted that L3 had the best in the galaxy. I wasn't making that connection yet. But once it, like, okay, this is cool on two fronts, because one, it was sad to see the character go, especially in the way that she did, just getting shot and then just talking to Lando, just saying like, what is this? And then she just, powers down. But just kind of a cool way for the character to, I guess, live on throughout the course of the stories that we're going to get with the Millennium Falcon. So I thought that was kind of neat that L3 now always has a presence once we see the Falcon. But then, like you said, making those connections to Empire, like I thought the same thing when I saw that moment when I rewatched it about 3PO having trouble communicating with the Falcon central computer. And it makes total sense why he would now that we know L3's personality. So yeah, I thought she worked great on multiple fronts. And I like the little droid rebellion she instigated too on Kessel. It harkens back to some of the, there was an old Dark Horse comic that kind of dealt with that. And I don't know if it was an intentional nod to that, but that's what I thought of when I saw it, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I agree. She was a great new character. But for me, I guess my standout I'm gonna have to give it to Enfys Nest, because first off, before I even saw the movie, that costume that she had, I thought looked awesome. It was just something cool, but it was different and unique for this, story that we're trying to tell. As like more tribal, I guess, design to it. But at the same time, it still had that cool Star Wars helmeted character feel to it that I always love about it.
You know what it kind of reminded me of, just off the top of my head, was the suit that Knox and Vicky Vale came upon in Batman 89 that Knox calls King of the Wicker People.
That's a good call, yeah.
You got a little bit of that kind of vibe going, kind of, which was, that wasn't the Japanese one. They didn't say where that one was from, but kind of cool,
No, yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that, because I do see the similarities there now that you mention it. But yeah, so just from the costume design, I was excited to see the character. But at the same time, I was going, better prepare myself for Enfys Nest not to have a big central role in the movie. After what happened with Captain Phasma in The Force Awakens, I learned to keep my expectations in check for a cool-looking character who might not have much to do in the actual movie. But I mean, her first appearance, I thought, was cool in itself. Just seeing, her clan, the Skyriders, try to take over the train heist, and just seeing her attack against Beckett, I thought it was short, but it was a cool little fight sequence that we got. And just how she took down Beckett right there, it was pretty cool. And so I expected, okay, they're just going to be, a little thorn in the side of Beckett and Han and their crew to get the coaxium that they need. They're just going to show up and just be an annoyance. But once we got that showdown at the end between Beckett, Han, Kira, Chewie, and Enfys Nest and her crew, and she took off her helmet to reveal that she's just a young girl. And then what they set up after that, I thought, okay, this is awesome, where they reveal that, they're actually just not a band of marauders, raiding different places and killing people off, but they actually have a cause that they're fighting for. And then once it got revealed that they're their own rebel cell, I was like, oh man, that is awesome. Like, I did not think that's the way they're going to go with Enfys Nest and her band of marauders there, but it's really cool that that's the direction they're going, because early on, Lucas always liked the idea and planted the seeds in Clone Wars about throughout the galaxy, there are these pockets of rebel cells that are out there kind of doing their own thing, fighting against the Empire in their own ways, and whatever ways they can help people and do what they can, and then eventually they'll all come together to form the Rebel Alliance. So the fact that now we can throw in Enfys Nest and the Skyriders as their own rebel cell at this point in time in the timeline is awesome, I think. And kind of makes me wish Star Wars Rebels was still going on, because I could just imagine them doing some cool stories meeting up with the Enfys Nest's rebel cell. So yeah, I was excited for the character going in just because, you know, she looked really cool, but what they did with her story I thought worked really, really well. And one of those aspects of the movie that left me excited about future possibilities they can do with this character. So yeah, I was glad that she didn't disappoint. But overall, like I said, I enjoyed a lot of these characters. I thought Woody Harrelson was great as Beckett. And then early on too, I like how, because originally I thought it was going to be something where, you know, we knew all the cast of characters who were going to be in this as their crew, and it would kind of form, you know, this, you know, ensemble cast of characters kind of similar to Rogue One, but obviously having a different goal in mind and different personalities and backgrounds where they came from, but a big ensemble. So I was kind of surprised where it was kind of split in two, where in the first half where the crew was Beckett, Han, Chewie, Rio, and Val, and then later on it becomes, you know, Han, Chewie, Beckett, Kira, and Lando in L3. So, and I thought that served the story better, where it wasn't, you know, there wasn't too many characters around at the same time where you couldn't spend enough time with them. But the fact that it was kind of split up in the first half of the movie and the second half, I thought worked really well. Even though the characters of Val and Rio, they were cool, and, you know, wish they would have survived longer to see more of them, because they were great characters. But at the same time, I felt that it worked best for the story that they were trying to tell here. So all around, like I said, the performances were great for all of them. But I guess out of all the new ones that stood out to me, I'd have to give the nod to Enfys Nest.
Yeah, she was really well utilized, and they did a solid job at the beginning, building up a sense of dread surrounding her.
Yeah.
That not a lot of movies can establish particularly well, especially when they try to. But no, I thought that they did a great job, and she definitely, I think, has some kind of future when we revisit the Rise of the Empire era. You know, who's to say where that will be? But obviously, there's something that happens at the end of this movie that might sync things up with other aspects of the Star Wars universe that we've seen before. So who knows where she could end up and whose path she could cross. It's pretty cool to think about the possibilities, but we'll get to that.
Yep. We definitely will. So before we get to that, though, let's kind of go over some of our favorite moments, or the favorite moment for each of us in the movie. So what would you say is your favorite, I guess, sequence, and just, even if it's a short, like quick shot, or a scene that was only a few seconds, what stood out to you the most in Solo?
Honestly, the thing that sticks out to me the most even now, and the thing that made me go from this is okay to I like this a lot, is the Kessel Run.
Mm-hmm.
Because not only did it answer one of those long-standing kind of annoying critiques about a line from A New Hope, but it was just a really solid action scene that I wasn't expecting to be as kind of out there and cosmic and fast and explosive as it was. I mean, clearly the Kessel Run, and I hadn't exposed myself to a significant amount of EU that may have depicted what the Kessel Run itself was. So I don't know how closely it might have stuck to that, or if it went in and did its own thing. But the way that it was depicted in this movie, it made it scary in a way that I certainly wasn't expecting. I mean, here I am as a kid thinking that the Kessel Run is some kind of race, but no, it wasn't that at all. And it ended up being an aspect of the Falcon's history that you understand why Han brags about it, because it is definitely one hell of an accomplishment, and the movie makes you feel it. So the Kessel Run to me is definitely my standout sequence of the entire movie. I could probably watch that on a loop. In fact, I'm really looking forward to seeing it again. As far as imagery is concerned, I think one of the last times that you actually see Han and Chewie standing side by side, when it's just like, here's the partnership that we've been building for the last couple of hours, and now they're ready to truly begin. I love when movies give me that sense of possibility, even if it's something I may have seen before. Something else that did it, like the Joker card at the end of Batman Begins, gave me a similar, obviously a different flavor, but a similar sense of like possibility coupled with reverence. And I appreciated that very much. I mean, it just goes back to the love of Chewie and the partnership between Chewie and Han. But no, I mean, the movie had a lot of really solid images in it. And I certainly wasn't expecting to see the Falcon go through the rough patch that it did during the Kessel Run, and even just, you know, crashing on the final planet. I thought that might have been a little bit more of a slow burn, but
Yeah.
it was cool seeing them line the pieces up for everything that we know will be coming.
Definitely. Well, Chris, you took my exact two moments.
Oh, I'm
that I, my
sorry.
favorites too. But hey, it just shows how we were in sync with what we liked in this movie. So
Great minds think alike.
exactly. But just real quick on the Kessel Run. I mean, I just echo what you said. Everything about how visually it looked amazing, and just how, you know, dangerous it was for Han to make that to make the Kessel Run. Like you said, how he would brag about it was all great. But the one thing I'll add to it is just how probably my favorite moment of that whole sequence is when Chewie steps into the co-pilot's chair. I thought that played out really well.
Oh,
Where
yeah.
first Han tells Kira, you know, I need a co-pilot, and she goes in, but then he's like telling her, I forget what he asked her to activate or to uh, start up on the Falcon, but she didn't know where it was at on the controls because she's not familiar with it. But then Chewie just steps right in and does it, and then he takes over in the co-pilot seat, and they just give each other this look, and that's got chills watching it for the first time. Like, this is Han and Chewie's first like adventure on the Falcon as a pilot and co-pilot, and it was really, really special. So that was my favorite part of the Kessel Run sequence. So
Well, and that reminds me of something too, because you know, the original trilogy did a pretty solid job of establishing the sort of relationship that Han personally has with the Falcon. And The Force Awakens did a solid job in amplifying that further, especially when he just gets to stand in the cockpit for the first time in conceivably years. And, you know, just the smile that plays across his face that he's finally back and he's where he belongs. And I thought they did a solid job in sort of establishing the reverence that Han has for the ship even well before it is his. And it kind of just links up to the reverence that we know he's going to have, not just through the Galactic Civil War, but obviously into the time of the Force Awakens. And I thought that was a pretty nice touch. And of course, you know, the imagery of the dice. I suspected that the dice would show up in Solo when we saw them in The Last Jedi. But that was a pretty nice touch. I actually rather enjoyed that. So nice to see that the roots of the love that Han has for the Falcon were shown pretty well in this one.
yeah, and my only little nitpick I have on the dice is that I wish they focused on it just a little bit more in the actual game that he won the Falcon on with Lando. Like, somewhere he holds it, you know, he doesn't have to say anything, but you see that he's holding it knowing, you know, it's his lucky dice, this is how he's going to get it. And just having him put it on like the Falcon as they enter it in, after we didn't even get that where they walk into the Falcons. And that's some of the stuff I was talking about where it's like really fanboy nitpicks, stuff I wanted to see more of. But it just would have been cool, like you said, nice symmetry to what we saw in The Last Jedi with the dice and everything. But it was still there. I just wish we could kind of focus on it just a little bit more in that end sequence. But yeah, another sequence I really liked is, I got to say, the whole beginning of the film where we meet Han and Kira on Corellia. I thought, you know, just this background story they made for those two characters where, you know, they're just kind of young kids just, you know, trying to survive and working for this, you know, so it was like it even mentioned this in the art book for the movie, how they were kind of playing like on the whole Oliver Twist scenario where they're working like for like his main criminals, having him run out and steal stuff, and who can get the best loot or merchandise, whatever you want to call it, to try to make money off it. But this visually, I liked that whole sequence where they bring Han to Lady Proxima and just that alien creature that she was. I mean, I was not expecting that, to have her the leader of this gang of kids be this giant like serpent sea monster type creature coming out of the water. Like, this is something that I like, where something different for Star Wars, but yet it still feels like a Star Wars creature. It's had its own unique feel to it, but yet it fits totally in the universe. I just like they were doing something really different, where it just wasn't some standard humanoid alien, or even just a human who was like the boss of all these kids, but they just really went out there to try something different with Lady Proxima, and I like that. And just the whole backstory of Han and where he came from, and like his relationship with Kira being established at that early age, and wanting, his main purpose was for him to go back there to get her out of that scenario, and it of course didn't work out that way. And that goes back to the moment that was one of your favorite shots too, and mine was Han, with Chewie putting his hand on Han's shoulders there, because the relationship that he had with Kira throughout the movie, he just thought they were going to be the partners together, and of course he wanted to. They were showing romantic signs to their relationship as well, obviously, but that was the person that he thought he was going to be traveling the galaxy with and going on all these adventures with on the Falcon. I'm sure once they were on the Falcon, that's what he was picturing. That's what he implied when he said, "I need a co-pilot," and she steps in. That was probably his dream come true right there. But the fact that she, ends up betraying him right after Beckett, and it seems like, everyone he's really cared about, especially more so with Kira, having kind of grown up with her, and that she's leaving him and there's nobody there except one, and that's Chewie. And he puts his hand on his shoulder, and just, again, like you said, establishing, the close bond that came out of this movie, and we know is going to last for years, and up until Han's death in The Force Awakens, which it makes that scene even more powerful. And Chewie's reaction when he sees Kylo Ren stab Han Solo, I mean, I gotta say, that was something I was looking forward to a lot in this movie, how that's going to make Han's death even more impactful when you see it. And I thought it did. And a lot of it comes from that final shot with just Han and Chewie together. They're the only ones left, but they're going to be together for, forever until their lives. So that's why that one goes up as one of my favorites. All right. So we got our favorite performances of old characters, new characters, favorite moments, but now it's time to get into the big surprise. I mean, the one I don't see how anyone could have saw coming, just not knowing anything about it, because I will say, going into it and seeing early tweets and reactions about the movie once people saw it, saying, "Oh, there's a big surprise in the movie that gets us excited for some future story possibilities," but they're not saying what it is, thankfully. They don't want to spoil it, but it just made me think, man, what could it be? I mean, part of me thinks it's going to be a Boba Fett connection. And then on that day, we got the announcement about James Mangold doing a Boba Fett movie, and I even thought, okay, so maybe this will be a Boba Fett cameo or surprise, kind of setting up for his movie. But man, I was not expecting to see those robot legs, and then you hear Sam Witwer's voice. I'm like, oh man, this is Darth Maul. We're seeing Darth Maul in live action again. Wow. And I couldn't remember a single word he said when I saw it the first time, because I was just in awe that they're actually doing this, bringing Maul back. And it was great, because being fans of the Clone Wars and Rebels, we know the story of Darth Maul, how he got involved in the criminal underworld. So it just made total sense that he would be the one who was in charge of Crimson Dawn, and who Dryden Voss answered to. And they hinted at a little bit throughout the course of the movie, where they're saying, "Do you know who I answer to?" and all that type of thing, hinting that there is, someone much more dangerous and powerful than Dryden Voss is. But I never would have imagined it would be Darth Maul. It was such an awesome surprise, and one that just makes total sense. So I could not be happier. First off, not being spoiled and being super surprised and having that amazing reaction, seeing it for the first time, but that they decided to do it, and how it just fits really, really perfectly for the story they were trying to tell. It was so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I did get spoiled ahead of time.
Oh, no.
I wasn't. Yeah, I know, right? I wasn't even looking for it. It just kind of popped up in front of me on one of my social media feeds.
That's awful.
So, yeah, I mean, so in the moment, it wasn't nearly as shocking as I was certainly hoping for it to be. But that doesn't diminish just how powerful a moment that is. Really, primarily for me anyway, because of what it means for the wider connected nature of the Star Wars universe. I mean, it's one thing to know while watching an episode of Clone Wars or watching an episode of Rebels that this is in continuity with the movies, and to put the puzzle pieces together after the fact when you're watching stuff. It's quite another to see something from one of those animated shows actually make a full-on, fully fledged canonical appearance on a movie screen. And I mean, seeing that lightsaber, hearing Sam Witwer's voice, like you said, seeing those robo legs, that just ties everything together in a way that the current movies had not yet done fully. We've always seen it's always been one way, right? The animated shows take from the movies, but now we're seeing things twisted a little bit with the movies taking from the animated shows. And it boggles the mind what kind of stories they could be concocting now that those things are more closely linked, because they are far more closely linked now than they were a week ago. So the possibilities are really staggering as to what kinds of stories that they can tell. And it shows a degree of confidence in the fans to keep up, because people who thought Darth Maul had died at the end of The Phantom Menace, and who might be confused now about why Maul is showing up in the newest Star Wars movie that takes place decades after The Phantom Menace, are going to want to know the answers to those questions. So what are they going to do? They're going to seek the information out. They're going to want to see where it was confirmed that Maul has come back. And it just creates a confidence in the material, and it creates a confidence in the wider universe that they are now more firmly establishing. Now that audiences have been trained in the Marvel method, they can probably reach a little bit deeper into the mythology in order to enrich the entire Star Wars movie-going experience. So this is really exciting to me, just for all of its canonical implications, and the ways in which they can intertwine previously less explored aspects of even animated materials and potentially other expanded universe stuff that we know is in continuity. So I was really happy to see Maul, and I certainly hope that we see him in a movie coming up before too long.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. And I'm just glad that Lucasfilm and John Kasdan, because I know he was the one that really wanted to get Maul to be the main boss of Crimson Dawn and be like overshadowing figure that's looming large over the smaller crime bosses. And I just love the fact that they didn't shy away from possibly thinking, well, we know not everyone's going to have seen Clone Wars or Rebels, so they're going to have no idea about Maul's history and how he got brought back to life, how he got involved with the criminal underworld. But they did it anyway. And I think that's something that I really hope hardcore Star Wars fans appreciate, because I don't think a lot of studios would do that for movies that have like the connectivity of like TV shows or like novels and stuff like that, to put it in a feature film where it could go, or not over the heads of general audiences, but I guess make them have tons of questions afterward. Because I think that a lot of studios would be scared to do that. But the fact that they didn't do it with Maul here, I just really appreciate as a diehard fan, because it just enriches everything other than, I just love how it just makes everything feel as one cohesive universe and story here. Because we know that Clone Wars and Rebels is in the canon, but when you actually see stuff that was established in the animated series form first, or even in a novel, and you see it on screen, it just makes it that much better. And like, they started a little bit with Saw Gerrera in Rogue One, but he was a pretty different character than when we first saw him in Clone Wars. But Maul was pretty much, he's ripped out of the small screen in CG form, in CG animation, I should say, and now brought to life in live action. Just seeing that was just really, really awesome. I love the fact that not only Sam Witwer got to voice him again, but getting Ray Park to play him again is awesome. And I'm sure he wouldn't have thought that would be a possibility a few years ago, but here he is. And like you said, the implications it can have on future stories is amazing. I mean, once I finally, when I saw it a second time and got to remember and heard what he said about telling Kira to join him on Dathomir, and how they're going to be working very closely from now on. I mean, just not only Maul, but Kira too as a character, because she's not, I don't believe that she's fully, immersed in the criminal underworld of Crimson Dawn. I mean, I think there's part of her that's probably betraying Han to survive a little bit too, and to have him survive, to have him not get involved anymore with Crimson Dawn, which she knows is being run by Maul. So I think in a way she's doing it to protect him as well, and just where that can lead, and just where all this can go to where we see Maul in Rebels, because we know that's the end game for Maul, because he ends up dying in season 3 episode Twin Sons. But just what is Maul planning at this stage in his life right here? I think that's just fascinating, and what it can mean for the characters we got to see in this movie, especially Kira, obviously. So just the idea, because she was obviously trained by Dryden Voss, and also that mention of Terrace Kasi as their fighting style from the old PlayStation 1 game. Wow, that was a deep cut right there, and I think it was awesome they put in there. But it just goes like, if she was trained by Voss in that fighting style, and Voss, I wonder if he was trained under Maul in any way. So just a little ripple effect that Maul's having on this criminal underworld, I think is going to be fascinating. If we see him, interact with Kira, and just what their goal is fascinating to see unfold. So yeah, it was just awesome to get that revealed. So it was the surprise. I was anticipating it throughout the course of the movie. Not to say that I wasn't engaged with the rest of the movie, just waiting for that surprise. But when we finally got it, it was like, man, it delivered. It did not disappoint. So yeah, hats off to John Kasdan and everyone who made it possible to get Darth Maul in this movie. It was phenomenal to get that. So yeah. And yeah, I guess to kind of wrap it up, I mean, that's not the only thing I want to say as far as that got me excited about the possibilities, because that was probably first and foremost. But just what they hinted at with Han and Beckett when he was talking about, hey, if you survive this, look me up on Tatooine. I know a big crime boss is putting a crew together. At first, I thought, oh, that's going to be the big surprise. Is it going to show Jabba? Maybe that's where Boba Fett will appear. So the fact that we got that tease along with Maul, it's like, man, the good stuff just keeps on coming. That's getting you excited about the possibilities. So that's why it's disappointing that it didn't do the box office numbers that a normal Star Wars movie does. And I've got to say, it got me a little worried that we might not see a Solo sequel that could expand on not just the Maul and Kira stuff, but Han and Chewie going for Jabba and taking that job that we know that got established in A New Hope. So I just left the theater really excited about the future and getting Solo sequels. I mean, I won't, that's something I want to see. So hopefully that's still on the table over at Lucasfilm. I'm sure they're evaluating everything with weekend box office numbers, but I just couldn't say enough how excited I was about the potential of getting more Solo movies, because if you were to tell me they were planning a solo trilogy, I'd go, really? You think that's something they really want to focus on instead of other story ideas and characters that they have, a trilogy with Han Solo? But now that we got this movie and everything it laid out, like, I'm ready for a Solo trilogy. I think they can easily do one with what they set up here. So hopefully that's still on the table over at Lucasfilm, because man, they just left me really excited, not only for just a really fun, great movie we got in this one, but for the potential of more awesome stuff that we can get with these characters, with this cast.
Well, and there's nothing to say too that that the Boba Fett movie won't end up being the follow-up to this, at least to some degree. I mean, like you said, the implication of the crime boss that they're going to meet on Tatooine definitely seems to be pointing to Jabba the Hutt. Maybe they'll surprise us on that front, but it definitely seems like Jabba. And we know that Han and Boba Fett have definitely crossed paths before by the time we see them tangle again in the original trilogy. So who's to say what the story is going to be exactly when it comes to what James Mangold has in mind for Boba Fett? Maybe we'll get to see the beginning of that rivalry. Maybe that will be the story. But, that's just obviously uninformed speculation on my part, but you never know what could happen. I certainly wouldn't be against it, especially after seeing how they laid the groundwork for Han Solo in this movie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I love about this movie so much. I think back about when seeing it, of how awesome it was to get in, or to get those blank pages filled out in Han's history, but then also the excitement about the future of seeing more adventures with Han and Chewie at this stage of their lives. So that's why I just think this movie is a win-win, and why I love it so much. So yeah, any final thoughts you want to say on the movie, Chris, before we wrap up?
I think we pretty much covered everything that I was thinking about. It's just, I mean, if you haven't seen it, hopefully you haven't listened this far, but for those people, I mean, if you're trying to convince someone to see it, Really, I mean, give it a shot. It's definitely an enjoyable way to spend a couple of hours. It has a lot of reverence for the movies that all of us have grown up with, because I think that's a key element. Like, people who get wary of revisiting those older characters, they do so out of a fear that they're not going to be treated properly. And I think this movie does a good job of treating the characters with the respect that they deserve. And it's just a fun story. So if that's your threshold for going to a movie, then check it out. It's fun. There's definitely worse stuff you could see than Solo.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, at least check it out, because I think once you do, you won't be disappointed. That's one of the things seen from some of the reactions, even people I've seen it with who weren't really excited about it, or the whole "why do we need a Solo movie?" But then when they actually see it, it's surprising. Like, man, this is a really fun, good Star Wars movie. So at least check it out. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone will have their own opinions, but I think it's definitely worth a look if you're even the little bit of a Star Wars fan. You gotta check it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so that's going to do it for this edition of the ThunderQuack Spoilercast. Chris, thanks again for joining me. And as always, you can find us at thunderquack.com to check out all the podcasts that we got on the network, including Star Wars: The Saga Continues, which we're going to be recording in a day or two to give our full breakdown on Solo: Star Wars Story. And you know how long we can go on those episodes. I don't think we'll break our Last Jedi 6-hour-long episode, but it should be a lengthy discussion. And also, you can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/ThunderQuack, where you can help support the network, as it's always much appreciated. We can bring you more spoiler casts like this and exclusive podcasts that we do on the network as well. So the support's always appreciated. But with that, that's going to do it. Again, Chris, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you very much, man. Take care, guys.